Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
All right, well, Mike Holliday, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you being here.
Love being here, Josh. Dig it, man.
You sure have, yeah. Well, why don't you start by telling people who you are? We can talk about Captains for Clean Water, but I think just as importantly, who you are and what you do for the organization and your background here on the Treasure Coast.
Okay, so my name is Mike Holliday. I've lived here since 1978 when I came to go to college at FIT. I've been a fishing guide here since 1986. I worked on the beach for Martin County as a lifeguard. Been the editor of a bunch of fishing magazines, marketing director for a bunch of sunglass companies and boat companies, and currently work for Captains for Clean Water as the outreach and engagement manager for the East Coast of the state. And, it's funny because I never really thought I would be an activist. Nobody really grows up wanting to be an activist. But you see something that impacts your life or your way of life. And if it's so dramatic, you become active. And it's really not my style, but I find myself embroiled in the water issues we've had here on the East Coast, specifically because I've seen the decline of the quality of the water in our waterways and the habitat in our waterways, which involves the fishing as well. If you look at fishing guides, we're kind of the canaries in the coal mine. We're out there and see everything every day, so we tend to see the dramatic issues before the rest of the public does.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you pretty much have a first-hand view of things. I mean, you probably are seeing things days, months, maybe even years before the public is becoming privy to some of this. What role does Captains for Clean Water? You guys have it's been around since 2015 or so. And then what role do they play, and how did you get involved with them specifically?
Well, really, they're a 501c3 nonprofit. They fight for Everglades restoration and advocating for Everglades restoration. And it's a really long story in that. Historically, Lake Okeechobee was a very shallow lake, and when the water got too high, it overflowed and flowed south. And it flowed all the way from Lake Okeechobee all the way to the Everglades and then out into Florida Bay. And the water would flow south through what they called the River of Grass, which people think still exists. It doesn't exist anymore. It was just a 60-mile wide sheet flow of water. The water would travel at about 1.5 miles a day, and the grass that it would go through would clean the nutrients out of it. So by the time it reached the Everglades and Florida Bay, it was very clean, pristine water. And it was super important because in Florida Bay and the Everglades, there's this natural salt balance that needs to be taken care of. When you get a lot of evaporation down there, the water will get too high of a salinity to the point that it'll kill off the grass, it'll kill off the mangroves. So that fresh water was super important. And then back in the 40s, the government found an area in the Everglades. It's now called the Everglades Agricultural Area. It's about 650,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee. They dried it up. They diked it, dried it up. All those years of the grass dying and settling to the bottom created a muck that is some of the most fertile land in the country for growing things. And the sugar industry took advantage of it. And most of those 650 acres are sugarcane right now. But the water doesn't flow there. And to do that, when they diverted the water, they built a dike around the lake so they could hold more water, and then increased the canal out to the west coast through the Caloosahatchee, and then dug the St. Lucie Canal. We never had fresh water in the St. Lucie River other than local runoff. They dug a canal into the St. Lucie River so it would drain out to the East Coast. And now about a third of the water that historically went down to the Everglades now gets there. The rest comes out to our coasts. And the Caloosahatchee naturally needs some fresh water. We don't need any fresh water. We don't want any fresh water in our river system, but we get quite a bit. Whenever the lake gets too high, they send the water to our coast. And I mean, we've had that happening for years and years, as long as I can remember. And I've seen really long periods of times of heavy releases, but it never really killed our seagrasses. It would impact it a little bit, but it never completely destroyed it. And then about 2011, between 2010 and 2012, really, we lost all our seagrass in the Indian River. And it seemed like overnight, all of a sudden you have these giant seagrass meadows that's habitat all the way across this shallow river gone. So now all the habitat is only shorelines, and really on the shorelines it's mangroves, seawalls, and docks. So all those fish, all the marine organisms that were out in the middle are now pushed to the shoreline. So there's been a dramatic decrease in that, as well as a dramatic decrease in water clarity, and it just seems to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah,
it's sad. I've seen it over time. And one of my big fears is a lot of people have moved here since then, and they think that's the norm. They think that going out on the Sailfish Point flats in our area, and there not being these big seagrass meadows, that it's just sand. They think that's how it always was. So that's kind of the thing that worries me, because it used to be these beautiful mixtures of turtle grass, which is a real indicator of a healthy environment, manatee grass, basically almost all the seagrasses were there, and just vibrant marine life. If you would walk on those flats, wading, that your shins would get sore from the grass rubbing across your knees and your shins. There was that much grass out there, and there were a lot of conchs and starfish, and the food web was just tremendous. And now it's just sort of like a moonscape when you're out there. There is still some life, and there's some coming back, but it's nothing like it used to be. And that's what got me involved in it. So I watched this decline over time, and finally I just said, my option is to either move somewhere where the habitat is still good and healthy, or fight. And back in 2000, they came up with a solution for it, and it was called a Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which was a suite of 68 different projects that they would build that would divert water back to the south, clean the water that's coming to the east and west. So at least, any volume of water we got here was cleaned of nutrients and pollutants that were in it. And it was supposed to be a 20-year plan. And as of 2020, really only about 4 or 5 of those projects had even been worked on. It just kept getting sidetracked. And that's what created Captains, is people getting frustrated with the lack of solutions taking place. And back in 2016 and 2018, we had major releases. A lot of it was cyanobacteria in it, and that blue-green algae stuff really bad, and that freaked the whole public out. And everybody became certainly a lot more militant and more aware of the issues. But for some reason, the solution just wasn't happening. And Captains for Clean Water started, and they were different than every conservation group. They were very outspoken. They were fearless, and they just advocated for the issue with points, honest talking points, and brought them to the public. And what they really did different was they used social media to do it. And they were really some of the first ones to change policy through social media and actually impact elections through social media. And that gave them a lot of power. And I saw how effective they were and said, I got to get involved in this. This is what's going to help get us to the solution. And here we are in 2025, and quite a few of those projects are now in the works. The biggest of which is the EAA Reservoir, which is a
Hmm.
big reservoir south of the lake. That will take about anywhere between 50 and 60% of the water that would come to our coasts will go into that reservoir, clean itself, and then go south. And then if you look at some of the ways they're managing the lake, they've knocked it down another 30%. So between the two projects, we can really reduce the volume of water coming to our coast, as well as the quality of the water that comes to our coast. So
Yeah,
the EAA reservoirs, it's a supported project. It's still not fully funded by either the state or federal government, but both entities have, contributed good volumes of money. More money has gone in there every year than has in the past. And right now, I think it's slated for completion in 2033 or 2034, I believe. So we're
got
still
it.
quite a bit of time out before we actually feel the solutions there.
Right. I think you make a good point when you talk about people who are just moving here, and
Mhm.
it probably is the same with the younger generation. I mean, I myself am I'm 35, so I was born in 89. You were on
Mhm.
these rivers before I was born, so you have a different picture of it. But if someone's moving here, if they're a younger generation, it kind of becomes a status quo, where it's, you're not used to seeing conch, for example, out there, and it just becomes a status quo. And then
Yep.
next thing you know, it's just, that's the new normal.
No, it is, and a good example is going to the sandbars out on Sailfish Point Flats. If you go
Yeah,
there
exactly.
on the
Yeah.
incoming tide, you get that beautiful blue water. That's how our water should look at all times, incoming tide or outgoing tide. But if you go on the outgoing tide, you get that brown water. That is, a lot of it right now is water that's being released. We're currently under releases,
Yeah.
discharges from Lake Okeechobee, and that's that brown water coming out on that flat, and it's not natural, and it impacts the grass, it impacts everything out there, and you really it's totally unfiltered water, with a lot of pollutants, a lot of pesticides, herbicides, and nitrogen, phosphorus, chemicals in it. Who knows what's in it? It's coming off the farms, and coming down through the Kissimmee River. So all sorts of contaminants that we swim in that we probably shouldn't be swimming in anyway. And we really, there's no reason for us to really have that water diverted at us.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking too, is how do all of these play a role? I mean, when it comes to Lake Okeechobee discharges, when it comes to the nutrient pollution, when it comes to some of the algae blooms we've seen, are all of these intertwined in some way, or are there other things that you look at that don't have to do with Lake Okeechobee that we have our eyes on, that are natural or unnatural, but that are raising a red flag to you as far as what people on the Treasure Coast should be looking for? I ask that because I'm sure a lot of people, it's kind of the, water quality is water quality is water quality, and they're not always sure
Sure.
who's accountable, how to fight it, and who to support if they want to fight it. You know what I mean?
No, I understand completely. And the thing you want to think about water, water is life for us.
Yeah.
If you can go a month without eating, 3 days without water, you're dead as a stone. So a lot of the water that comes out of Lake Okeechobee feeds is our drinking water as well, and leads to the aquifer in South Florida's drinking water. And the water that does not go south, historically, a lot of that water that went south recharged the aquifer for South Florida. And now that's starting to dry up a little bit, and the salt table's starting to rise in Dade and Broward County. And that's going to be an issue. The larger the population, and eventually it could be an issue here. But you
Right.
go back to just the quality of the water that's coming out of there. The lake has some major issues going right now. The lake is at the worst it's ever been. Um, they have the biggest issue right now. They have is the long term muck and detritus that's layering the whole bottom of the lake. On
Yeah.
top of the
Yeah.
fact that they're doing aquatic spraying. Historically they went in and removed the weeds. Now they're spraying, basically Roundup on a lot of the chemicals on the lake, and that matter, those weeds die and decay, and then when the wind stirs it up, it just comes up in the water column and blocks the sunlight from going through and prevents growth in the lake as itself. That muck also washes its way down here. Now, all those chemicals work their way down here.
Right.
So, the lake is at a point now where almost every year they have, bacteria, a blue-green algae bloom on the lake, and a fairly major one every year.
Mm-hmm.
It happens more in the summer months, and if they're releasing in the summer, the algae's coming this way. There's no way around it. But the lake itself, whether it comes this way or not, is going to have that algae bloom on it. And the lake itself is still, filled with muck right now. And it also is getting the chemicals that are coming in through the Kissimmee River, as well as the herbicide spraying on that lake. So, the lake has to be addressed as well. And the folks that live out at the lake, they're up in arms because they're seeing it as well.
Exactly. Yeah. We have a lot of followers in Okeechobee, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I guess we could talk solutions. I'm sure you have ideas about how things can be rectified. What do you think? Is it just the flow of the water, or is it also the fact that Lake Okeechobee is just it's a deeper and larger animal than it was in the past? Or what in your eyes is the
There's so many
solution?
components to it.
Yeah.
It's a very complex problem because we altered everything.
Right.
Again,
Exactly.
we're going to build a reservoir. We're not building the sheet flow again, which is
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be as effective, but and it can't take the volume. And then we've built that big dike on the lake, and where it's holding more water, and that's creating a lot of issues right now. In fact, that's the reason we're getting discharges right now. The lake had been kept artificially high for the last couple of years, and that's part of the influence of the agricultural industry south of the lake, particularly sugar. They like to keep the lake high because it's a water source for them, and the more water in the lake, they're guaranteed. If we have drought conditions, they still have all the water they need to irrigate their farms. The downside to that is, once you keep the lake above probably 13 feet, the grass is impacted. And on any given lake, the grass is a natural filter, just like seagrasses are in the rivers. The grass is a natural filter on our lakes. So when you start having too much water or too high of a depth, a lot of that grass can't grow because it can't reach bottom. So you lose the filters naturally in the lake, and they've had that problem. When we went into November, they were almost at 16 feet, and they had it that way for a couple of years. So they'd lost a major component of their natural filtering system in Lake Okeechobee. So the Army Corps of Engineers decided that they want to, reduce the water levels on the lake. They actually wanted to get it down to around 12 feet for 60 days or 11 feet for 30 days to allow the grass to start growing. And as we go into the rainy season, have the lake low enough that a lot of the grass will come back. Nature is resilient, and it will bring it back really quickly. So that's why we've been getting discharges. We've had them for about 110 days or so now, and the volume has been on the East Coast has been about 1,400 cubic feet a second, which is about 900 million gallons a day. On the West Coast, it was more like 2,100 cubic feet a second. So, 1.7 billion gallons a day. So you have these huge volumes coming for long periods of time, and that's what really impacts the estuaries. If we get trickle flows or we get it for 7 or 8 days, it's not going to kill things. But when you get 100 days or more of 900 million gallons of water a day, sooner or later, those freshwater areas become salt. I mean, the
Yeah.
saltwater areas become fresh. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Right.
And
Yeah.
marine organisms just can't survive it, and you start having to die off. And we've seen it with the St. Lucie River. that river used to be crystal clear. I just found out the other day, the sandbar that everybody used to go to in the St. Lucie River was by the hospital. And that's where everybody used to hang out, not where the sandbar is in Selfish Point Flat. Because the water was crystal clear there, and it was beautiful,
Yeah.
and there were oyster bars right there,
Right.
and seagrass and all. And that's no more. That's all covered with the muck that washes downstream, layers on top of the bottom in the river, and that also prevents grass from growing, oysters from growing, and basically any growth from coming up because it can't take a foothold in that muck. But if you go, over like by the Palm City Bridge and you step out of your boat on the edge of the channel, you're going to sink up to your waist in muck. There's so
Yeah.
much. And the further you go downriver, the less of that there is. Eventually, that stuff washes out. The way our system works, when the water comes out of the St. Lucie River, it comes around the tip of Sewell's Point, and it'll come off the tip and kind of hug the tip a little bit, and then push its way to the south side of our inlet, and then it will go out our inlet and wash its way south. The discharge water typically flows south, and then on the incoming tide, that tide pushes it back into the inlet and up the Indian River, and that's how we get those discharge water or that fresh water into the Indian River. So the longer it lasts, the more impact you're going to have, the more fresh water, and the further it's going to push up into the Indian River and impact the Indian River. The St. Lucie River, for the most part, it's done, if you ask
Yeah.
me. I mean, the muck is so bad. When we used to fish the seawalls, you could fish them all day. Now, once the boat traffic gets going, there's so much muck. The waves stir up the muck on the walls, and the fish just don't want to be in it. So by 9 o'clock, the walls aren't nearly as effective as they used to be. So, even if they stop the water from coming tomorrow, the St. Lucie River, you would have to make an effort to clean up some of that muck and take it out of there before you'd see it really change much, other than water quality. The water quality would be much better, but the seagrasses can't grow in that muck until you scrape that muck out and create the sand that was naturally there. It just won't come back.
Got it. Yeah. So there would have to be some sort of concerted effort there to actually take the muck out and then lay the groundwork for the grasses to grow, even if the water quality is better, is what you're saying. In order for it to get back to what it used to be, you'd have to get that concerted effort to, fix the damage that's been done already. Right. Yeah.
And one of the things we see that's been a little disturbing over the last couple of years is some of that stuff, that muck or the detritus, the contaminants that are in the water that are flowing down are starting to push up into the Indian River. So when you go out on the Selfish Point Flats, you'll feel like the bottom doesn't feel like sand anymore. It feels like a little dust on top of it. And once that dust gets too thick, the grass can't grow, can't take a foothold. So we're starting to see some of that pushing into the Indian River as well. The good thing is the Selfish Point Flats, they get a really good cleansing. And if you get a hurricane, as much as we hate hurricanes or a big storm, it really cleans a lot of that muck off. So, there still is some long-term hope for those areas. And I've been out there recently, and the rhizomes in the grass, the natural root systems in the grass are showing up pretty well. So I think with the decrease in the discharges we've had, they just announced this weekend that they decreased their discharges to our coast. To the East Coast, it decreased from that 900 million gallons a day to about 320 million gallons a day, which is significant. That we almost won't even notice.
Right.
So
I saw
that's
that.
going to allow us to have a healthy spring. Our growing season on the Selfish Point Flats is going to be good.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I saw you guys had posted that. I think you just posted something about it yesterday on the Facebook, that the discharges were brought down a bit. What are your thoughts? I mean, I'm not sure how much you want to discuss this or you don't want to discuss this, but what are your thoughts on talking about things like special interest or different policies in place that you think could rectify or harm the problem, or how you or the organization itself are advocating?
So we're a non-political group, but without a doubt, there's a special interest influence that is and always has been sort of delaying Everglades restoration. There's been a solution there for over 20 years, and the longer it gets delayed, the projects get delayed, the more costly they become, and at some point, they get too expensive. They just become difficult to fund.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad. The fact that the EAA reservoir is funded, not fully funded, but they're funding it right now, and it's under construction. They've already worked on the surrounding marsh, which will clean the water around it. That's a good sign. But
Yeah.
The Senate tomorrow will take money from that project and put it to another project north of the lake, and say, like, okay, we want to. There's a project to take some of that dirty water and pump it into the ground, into the aquifer, and then be able to pull it out whenever they want it, or whenever they need it. The problem is you have to clean that water before, and you have to clean it to drinking water quality before you even do that. So it's very costly. And the real, it sounds to me like a way for the farmers north of the lake to get free irrigation anytime they want. In that, we can pull water anytime we want from the lake and use it for irrigation. And, not for nothing, the sugar farms are buying their way up towards the north of the lake. It just seems awfully coincidental to me.
Yeah, that's
so we see a lot of these sidetrack. It's all special interest stuff. It's kind of a shame. Everybody knows the answer. They know the problem. They know the answer, and the answer is to send the water south. Yet it doesn't seem to be getting done. And the governor's funded it well, and the federal government has funded it every year. But the state, the Senate, and the House, they tend to try and pull some of those funds from that project, which delays it and makes it more costly, and use it for other projects, which seem counterproductive.
Yeah, I think you're right. Honestly, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. The longer it is pushed on, I know you said there were something like 36 items that were initially on the checklist. I imagine the cost to
initially
complete
it was
those
68. It still is 68.
68. I mean, I imagine the cost, if you were to come up with a budget when that checklist was first created, I mean, it's probably up, tenfold. If only, 4 or so are completed, have been completed since. I mean, it brings the price tag up quite a bit.
Yeah. The price on the EAA reservoir itself has already doubled.
Wow.
And it just every day it's worse and worse.
What if, just for people watching, and before, because we're pulling up on 30 minutes now, for people who want to stay informed, or they want to play a role, or they want to hear about what's going on and support any way they can, what are the best avenues? Is it the Captains for Clean Water website? Is it Facebook, or what's the best route? Because we'll link them in where we post it.
So there's a couple ways. Following on social media is outstanding, on Facebook or on Instagram. Go to captainsforcleanwater.org and sign up, and they'll send you emails. And they're not going to bomb you with emails. They're only going to send you an email when there's an issue. We advocate for the problems that we have, and we stay on top of a lot of things. If there's a bad bill that comes up, and this has been the strength of Captains for Clean Water, we have an army of followers. And if there's a bad bill that comes up, we'll get 20, 30, 40,000 people signing a petition before that bill gets heard. And we'll get all the fishing guides, and we'll go up to Tallahassee and stand in front of the Senate and tell them it's a bad bill. And, when you bring in, the more attention you bring to issues, the more likely the bad issues are going to get worked out, and people are going to back down a little bit. And that's been a major strength of this organization. And I can tell you, captainsforcleanwater.org, you'll find, if you don't know anything about the the issue. You can educate yourself on the issue, as well as get involved in some of our programs. But they're not the kind of group that just bombs you with emails every week. You'll get one when we have issues or something that needs attention, where we need vocal support. And that's been the strength of the organization, is the number of people who are speaking out. And it's all across this country.
That's great to hear. Well, look, I hope people listening, I hope that they will connect. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this on the Treasure Coast will resonate with it. And so I hope they do connect, they stay updated, and they support the mission. And Mike, I really appreciate you being on here with me.
Thank you, Josh. My last thing I'll tell you is,
please,
nature is very resilient, and there's a solution, and we can make it better. We can bring it back to how it was, and it will not take very long. It's just a matter of directing the water where we need it to be, cleaning the water before it gets there, and stopping the water from coming into our habitats and let them regrow.
Amen.
So thank you for your time.
Great, Mike.
It's been amazing.
No, thank you.
That's
really.
a wrap for this episode of The Current by treasurecoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit treasurecoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at treasurecoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.